At my brother's celebration dinner, my mother stood up and announced to 50 guests that I would be paying his entire $180,000 tuition because I had no husband and no children to spend my money on. When I looked her dead in the eye and said no, she sent him after me. 3 weeks later, a prominent university director called me. He wanted to know why my brother's scholarship-winning business plan had a hidden digital watermark registered to my company. My mother texted me to pick up the phone immediately, while my brother called me nonstop. I just poured my coffee and smiled. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to entitled relatives who tried to take credit for your hard work. My name is Stella and I am 32 years old. I work as a financial strategist, specializing in artificial intelligence optimization. I have spent my entire adult life building my career from the ground up without a single cent of help from my family. In our family, appearances mean everything. My parents, Deborah and William, care more about how things look to their country club friends than they care about the truth. And the truth is that my younger brother, Preston, is a walking disaster hiding behind expensive suits. Preston is 30 years old and has never held a real job for more than 6 months. I call him a professional leech. I is married to Jasmine, a 29-year-old public relations manager and social media influencer. Jasmine is a beautiful and sharp African-American woman who knows exactly how to manipulate a crowd. But their entire lifestyle is funded by my parents, draining their retirement accounts to keep up the facade. Last month, my parents hosted a massive dinner party at their country club to celebrate Preston getting accepted into a top-tier business school for his Master of Business Administration degree. 50 of our extended family members and family friends were there. I sat quietly at a table near the back, sipping my wine and minding my own business. I had only come because my mother begged me to show family unity. I should have known it was a trap. Halfway through the main course, my mother tapped her spoon against her crystal wine glass. The sharp ringing sound cut through the chatter, and the room fell completely silent. Everyone turned to look at her as she stood up at the head table, beaming with pride. "We are so incredibly proud of Preston," she announced, her voice echoing across the dining room. "He is taking the next big step in building our family legacy by attending one of the best business programs in the country. And we are even prouder to announce something truly special tonight." She turned her gaze directly toward me. Her smile was wide and completely fake. "Family is about lifting each other up," she continued. "And in that spirit, Stella has generously agreed to cover Preston's entire $180,000 tuition. Since she does not have the financial burden of a husband or children, she wants to invest her success into her brother's future." The room erupted in applause. People turned in their chairs to beam at me. Aunts and uncles nodded with approving smiles. Jasmine sat next to Preston, clapping loudly and wiping a fake tear from her eye. Preston raised his glass to me, mouthing the words, "Thank you, sis." I sat frozen in my chair. The air in my lungs simply vanished. I had never agreed to any of this. We had never even discussed his tuition. My mother was using public pressure to corner me into funding her golden child. She knew I had a lucrative career, and she thought putting me on the spot in front of 50 people would force me to smile and nod to avoid causing a scene. She thought my fear of public embarrassment was stronger than my self-respect. She thought wrong. I slowly set my wine glass down on the white tablecloth. The applause began to die down as people waited for me to stand up and say something graceful. I did stand up, but I did not smile. "No, I didn't," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was steady, and it carried perfectly across the quiet room. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's smile froze on her face. I looked directly at her and spoke clearly, so there could be no misunderstanding. "I never agreed to pay for his tuition. I will not be paying $180,000 or even a single dollar for his degree." Gasps rippled through the dining room. The polished, wealthy facade of the evening cracked in half. My father, William, immediately stood up, his face turning a deep shade of red. He marched over to my table and grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the hallway that led to the coat check area. He was furious. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed, keeping his voice low but filled with rage. Are you trying to humiliate us in front of everyone? I pulled my arm out of his grip. You humiliated yourselves, I replied calmly. You tried to extort me publicly. Did you really think I would just write a check for almost $200,000 because you put me on the spot? William pointed a furious finger at me. You should be honored to help him. Cold anger settled deep inside my chest. Help him, I asked. Like when he left me with $40,000 in debt. I turned and walked away completely done with them. But Jasmine stepped into my path. You will regret this, she whispered, her voice full of venom. The real theft had already happened in silence. I pushed past Jasmine and walked straight out of the dining room, leaving the stunned whispers of our relatives behind me. The heavy oak doors of the country club swung shut, but I did not even make it to the valet stand before I heard heavy footsteps pounding against the marble floor behind me. It was my father. His face was a dangerous shade of purple, and the veins in his neck stood out against his stiff white collar. Preston was trailing right behind him, looking like a kicked puppy, while Jasmine stayed back, probably already calculating how to spin this on her social media. Stella, my father hissed, grabbing my shoulder before I could reach for my coat. You march right back in there and apologize to your mother. You are embarrassing this family in front of the entire board of directors. I yanked my shoulder out of his grasp. I am not the one who stood up and lied to 50 people, I shot back. If you wanted to pay for his business school, you should have saved your own money instead of trying to extort your daughter. My father stepped closer, lowering his voice to a menacing growl. We are your parents. We gave you everything. You owe this family. And Preston is finally stepping up to take over the family investments. He needs this master of business administration to build his network. You have more than enough in your corporate accounts to cover it. You are single. You have no dependents. What else are you going to do with that money? I let out a harsh laugh, the sound echoing in the empty lobby. Build his network, I asked, staring right at Preston, who immediately looked down at his expensive Italian leather shoes. Shoes that I knew for a fact my parents had bought him. Let us talk about his brilliant networking skills. Do you mean like his genius cryptocurrency startup 4 years ago? The one where he convinced me to co-sign a business loan because you and Mom begged me to support my brother. Preston finally spoke up, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Come on, Stella, that was years ago. The market crashed. It was not my fault. Not your fault, I repeated, stepping toward him, until he actually backed up against a decorative pillar. You used the business funds to lease a sports car and take Jasmine on a 2-week vacation to Dubai. You bankrupted the company before you even launched a single product. I spent 2 years eating cheap noodles and working 80-hour weeks at my financial firm just to pay off the $40,000 credit card debt you left in my name. I ruined my own credit score so yours would stay clean. And neither you nor Dad ever paid me back a single dime. My father waved his hand as if dismissing a minor inconvenience. That was a learning experience for him. He is 30 years old now. He has grown. He is a married man with responsibilities. Jasmine is helping him build a real brand. He needs this degree to legitimize his new corporate strategy. Legitimize what I asked, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. He does not have a strategy. He has a habit of bleeding people dry. If he is so grown up, he can walk into a bank and take out a student loan just like every other normal American adult. I paid my own way through college. I built my artificial intelligence financial models while living in a cramped apartment. No one handed me $180,000 on a silver platter. Preston adopted his best victim face, the one he always used to manipulate our mother. I cannot take out a loan, Stella. You know Jasmine and I are trying to buy that house in the suburbs. We need our debt-to-income ratio to look perfect for the mortgage approval. If I take out student loans, we lose the house. Mom and Dad are already tapped out from helping us with the down payment. You are the only one with liquid cash. You are just being spiteful because Jasmine and I are building a family, and you are alone. The sheer audacity of his words hung in the air. He wanted me to fund his elite education so he could buy a luxury house with his wife while actively insulting my life choices. I looked at my brother, a grown man, wearing a designer suit. He did not pay for, begging his sister to fund his life, so he would not have to face a single consequence. I am not spiteful, Preston. I said, my tone completely flat. I am simply immune to you, both of you. I looked at my father, who was practically shaking with rage. I am establishing a hard boundary right now. I will not fund his degree. I will not fund his lifestyle. Do not ever ambush me in public again. I turned around, grabbed my coat from the stunned attendant, and walked out into the cool evening air. I handed my parking ticket to the young valet and stood waiting patiently for my car. My heart was pounding, but I did not shed a single tear. I had spent years crying over blatant favoritism from my family. I was done crying. I was a respected financial strategist. I dealt with ruthless venture capitalists and aggressive corporate executives every single day. My family thought they could bully me because they still saw me as the obedient daughter who just wanted their love. They did not realize that the obedient daughter died the day I paid off Preston and his fraudulent debt. As the valet pulled my car up to the curb, I felt a strange sense of finality. I tipped the driver, got in, and locked the doors. I drove away from that awful country club feeling absolutely, completely liberated. But that feeling of liberation was only a temporary illusion. As the streetlights of the affluent neighborhood flashed past my windshield, my mind kept replaying the final moments before I had stepped out into the night air. My father and brother had not been the only ones to confront me. Just before I had reached the valet stand, Jasmine had slipped out of the main dining room and cornered me near the coat check. Jasmine blocked my path. She was wearing a stunning silk dress and carrying a handbag that cost more than most people make in a month. Every single item she wore had been paid for by my father, William. She leaned in close to me, a malicious smirk playing across her perfectly painted lips. "You are going to regret humiliating your brother tonight," she had whispered, her voice laced with venom. "We do not need your pathetic money anyway. Preston is destined for greatness, and you are just a bitter, lonely woman who wants to drag him down." I had simply looked at her, brushed past her shoulder, and walked out the door. I focused on the road ahead, letting the cool air from the climate control wash over my face. I thought about Jasmine and her empty threats. She was a public relations manager who spent her entire life curating a fake online persona to make people believe she and Preston were a power couple. In reality, they were two adults playing pretend with my parents' retirement funds. I turned the steering wheel and guided my car onto the highway, heading back to the city. I lived in a modern townhouse in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. It was a home I had purchased myself with money I had earned through years of relentless hard work, analyzing complex financial data, and building artificial intelligence models for venture capital firms. I pulled into my private garage and cut the engine. The silence of the garage was comforting compared to the chaotic screaming of my family. I grabbed my purse and my heavy leather work briefcase from the passenger seat. I had brought the briefcase to the country club because I had been working on a massive corporate pitch right up until the moment my mother demanded I attend the celebration dinner. When I arrived at the club, I had left the briefcase securely tucked away in the private family lounge area while we ate in the main dining hall. Our family always reserved the private lounge for coats and bags during large events, so I had assumed my belongings were perfectly safe. I unlocked the door leading from the garage into my kitchen and set my keys on the counter. The house was dark and quiet. I walked into the living room and placed my briefcase on the glass coffee table. As I reached to unbuckle the leather straps, my hand froze. The heavy brass zipper on the main compartment was pulled back about 2 inches. It was a small detail, but my entire career was built on noticing small details. I am meticulous about my work equipment. I always zip my bag completely closed and lock the brass clasp. Always. The clasp was unlocked and the zipper was slightly parted. A cold chill crept down my spine, replacing the earlier feelings of liberation. I slowly pulled the zipper open and reached inside. My laptop was exactly where I had left it, but the charging cable was wrapped differently. I always loop the cable in a specific over-under pattern to prevent damage to the wires. The cable was currently wrapped in a hasty, haphazard circle. Someone had taken my laptop out of the bag, used it, and put it back in a rush. I pulled the sleek silver machine out and set it on the coffee table. I opened the lid. The screen immediately woke up, demanding my fingerprint. I pressed my finger against the sensor. The desktop appeared, and I immediately opened my system activity monitor. I am a financial strategist who deals with proprietary artificial intelligence algorithms worth millions of dollars. Because I handle highly sensitive venture capital data, my laptop is equipped with enterprise-grade security logging. I scrolled through the system access logs, my eyes scanning the timestamps. My heart began to beat faster as I found exactly what I was looking for. At 8:42 that evening, right in the middle of the dinner service when my mother was busy giving her grand speech about my supposed generosity, someone had successfully bypassed my basic sleep screen. I had disabled the primary biometric lock earlier that afternoon while running a continuous code compilation, and I had forgotten to re-enable it before leaving my laptop in the club lounge. The log showed that a portable universal serial bus drive had been inserted into the left port of my machine. A massive data transfer had been initiated. Someone had copied a folder. Not just any folder. They had copied the exact directory containing my entire 8-month artificial intelligence optimization project. The predictive algorithm I had built to secure my next major corporate promotion was gone. The realization hit me like a physical blow, the argument in the lobby. My father screaming at me. Preston playing the victim. Jasmine cornering me in the coat check area with that smug smile telling me they did not need my money anyway. They did not need my money because Preston had already stolen my intellectual property. He had slipped away during the appetizer course, gone into the private family lounge, and downloaded my entire life work onto a flash drive. He was planning to use my artificial intelligence architecture to fake his way through business school. I closed the laptop lid and stood alone in the dark room. A calm energy washed over me. "You absolute idiot," I whispered softly. I did not call the police that night. I did not text my parents to complain about the stolen files. I knew exactly how that conversation would play out. My father would accuse me of being paranoid and dramatic. My mother would say I was trying to sabotage my brother out of sheer spite. Jasmine would immediately spin it on social media, claiming I was framing her husband because I was jealous of his brilliant future. I had dealt with their relentless gaslighting my entire life. I knew that confronting a desperate thief without an ironclad audience only gives them time to destroy the physical evidence and rewrite the narrative. So I simply went to sleep. For the next 3 weeks, an eerie, heavy silence settled over my entire life. My phone did not ring with the usual demands for cash. The family group chat remained completely dormant. In my household, the silent treatment was always a weapon of choice. It was a calculated tactic designed to make the targeted person feel isolated, guilty, and anxious. Usually, my parents expected the outcast to eventually cave under the emotional pressure and come crawling back with tearful apologies and an open checkbook. But they severely underestimated how much I genuinely enjoyed the peace and quiet. I spent those 3 weeks focusing entirely on my career. As a financial strategist, I was accustomed to surviving in high-pressure corporate environments. I went to my corner office every single morning, led my team meetings with sharp precision, and continued refining my secondary backup algorithms. I acted as if absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, the long silence was finally broken. I was sitting in my glass-walled office reviewing a complex risk assessment portfolio when my phone buzzed loudly against the wood of my desk. The screen lit up with a notification from my mother. It was the very first direct communication I had received since the disastrous country club dinner. I picked up the phone fully expecting another self-righteous lecture, or perhaps a newly crafted aggressive demand for money. Instead, it was just a single link to a web page followed by a short block of text. I read her message first. The words practically dripped with maternal smugness right through the glass screen. "See, Stella," my mother wrote. "He did not need your selfish money after all. Real talent always finds a way to rise to the top. Do not come crawling to us when he is a billionaire. We will always remember who stood by him and who tried to hold him back." I stared at the message, feeling a familiar mix of intense disgust and dark amusement. The absolute sheer arrogance of her statement was staggering. I tapped the blue link she had sent. It opened the official web browser on my phone, instantly directing me to the press room page of the prestigious business school Preston had been so desperate to get into. The web page took a long second to load on the university server. When the massive banner image finally appeared, my breath caught sharply in my throat. The headline was printed in bold, aggressive black letters across the very top of the screen. Local entrepreneur secures $500,000 grant with groundbreaking artificial intelligence financial model. Below the dramatic headline was a professionally shot high-resolution photograph of my brother. Preston was standing proudly in front of a sleek university presentation board. He was wearing a tailored navy suit and flashing his signature charismatic smile directly at the camera. He looked every single bit the successful, brilliant tech founder he had always pretended to be. The lengthy article below the photograph detailed his incredible supposed achievement. It explained that Preston had bypassed the traditional academic admissions route by submitting a revolutionary predictive financial algorithm directly to the University Innovation Board. The esteemed dean of the business school was quoted extensively praising his unprecedented approach to modern venture capital risk management. Because of this spectacular submission, Preston had not only been granted a full-ride scholarship covering his entire tuition, but he had also won the highly coveted Future Innovators seed funding. The university-partnered venture capital firm had awarded him a preliminary grant of $500,000 to develop his software for commercial use. I read the entire article twice just to make sure I was not hallucinating the details. My brother, a man who could barely balance a standard household checkbook without crying to our father, had just secured $500,000 in institutional funding. The university press release went on to describe the deep complexity of the software model, highlighting its unique ability to process millions of data points in real time to predict rapid market fluctuations. It sounded incredibly impressive and highly technical to the casual reader. My mother clearly believed her golden son was a sudden prodigy who had cleverly hidden his extreme genius from the world until this very moment. She thought this article proved her right and proved me wrong. She genuinely believed this was the ultimate public vindication of her blind, endless favoritism. I zoomed in closely on the photograph of Preston standing in front of the presentation board. The board behind him displayed several sharply printed charts and a large visual diagram of a software user interface. I studied the geometric shapes, the specific color coding, and the highly detailed data nodes printed on that glossy board. My pulse drummed a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I did not feel panic. I did not feel the crushing, terrible weight of betrayal that my mother had intended for me to feel when she sent that gloating link. I set my phone face down on my polished mahogany desk and leaned back slowly in my ergonomic leather chair. I knew exactly what I was looking at. The proprietary software architecture I had carefully coded for 8 grueling months was now being paraded in front of the entire world by a fraud. He had taken my absolute best work and literally slapped his own name on the cover page. The sheer audacity of his crime was breathtaking. It was a massive, incredibly stupid, completely unforgivable mistake. I stared at the screen, letting the reality of his incredibly stupid mistake wash over me. My eyes traced every single line and curve printed on that presentation board behind him. There was absolutely no mistaking what I was looking at. The complex diagrams detailing the artificial intelligence neural networks, the user interface mockups, the proprietary algorithms designed to analyze venture capital portfolios. All of it was mine. It was the exact project I had spent 8 grueling months coding from scratch. I had sacrificed my weekends, my holidays, and countless hours of sleep to build that software architecture. It was designed for a massive upcoming corporate pitch that would secure my firm a multi-million-dollar contract. And now here it was being paraded in a university press release by my lazy, entitled brother. I leaned in closer to the computer monitor, examining the high-resolution photograph pixel by pixel. Preston had not even bothered to change the color scheme. He had kept my signature dark blue and silver aesthetic. He had literally just copied the raw files, deleted my name from the title slide, and typed his own name in bold letters. It was a level of intellectual theft so brazen and lazy that it almost defied logic. But then again, logic had never been my brother's strong suit. He had always relied on his natural charisma and our parents' endless financial bailouts to navigate through life. Everything from that night at the country club suddenly snapped into perfect crystalline focus. The slightly unzipped leather briefcase, the charging cable wrapped in a messy, hasty circle instead of my usual precise over-under loop. The system access logs showing a portable drive inserted into my machine at exactly 8:42 in the evening. It all made perfect sense now. My mother standing up and publicly demanding that I pay his $180,000 tuition had not just been an extortion attempt. It had been the ultimate distraction. While I was busy fighting with my parents in the lobby and establishing boundaries, Preston had slipped away into the private family lounge. He had bypassed my disabled security lock and downloaded my entire livelihood onto a flash drive. A normal person might have panicked in this situation. A normal person might have started screaming or immediately dialed the police to report a grand larceny. Another woman might have broken down in tears at the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. My own flesh and blood had orchestrated a targeted theft against me while my mother held my attention hostage. But I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel an ounce of panic. Instead, a deep, cold, calculated smile spread slowly across my face. I felt an absolute thrilling sense of clarity. I stood up from my ergonomic leather desk chair and walked out of my home office. My footsteps were steady and deliberate against the hardwood floor. I made my way into the kitchen where the afternoon sun was streaming through the large windows. I reached for my favorite ceramic mug and moved toward the espresso machine. My movements were calm and unhurried. I selected a premium dark roast blend and listened to the low, comforting hum of the machine grinding the beans. As the rich, dark liquid poured into my cup, I thought about the sheer stupidity of my brother's actions. Preston had always been a master at faking competence. He knew how to buy expensive suits, how to use corporate buzzwords in casual conversation, and how to project unearned confidence. He must have taken my raw files to a high-end printing shop, slapped them onto professional presentation boards, and memorized just enough technical jargon to fool an academic panel. The University Innovation Board had looked at my brilliant financial model and assumed the handsome, charismatic man standing in front of them was a self-taught tech genius. They had awarded him a full-ride scholarship and a $500,000 grant based on a pitch deck he did not write and software he did not understand. I took a long, slow sip of my hot coffee, letting the bitter flavor ground me in the present moment. I looked out the kitchen window at the quiet suburban street. "You absolute idiot," I whispered softly to the empty room. My voice was completely devoid of anger. It was filled only with a dark, satisfying anticipation. Preston thought he had won. My mother thought she had secured the ultimate victory and proved my independence was meaningless. Jasmine was probably already spending that grant money in her head. What my brother failed to realize was that artificial intelligence software is not just a static document you can print on a piece of cardboard. It is a living, breathing ecosystem of code. When you steal a high-level proprietary financial algorithm, you are not just stealing pretty pictures and graphs. You are stealing deep, complex layers of digital architecture. He had no idea what was actually buried inside those files. He only saw the surface-level presentation and assumed he could claim it as his own without any consequences. I walked back to my office holding my warm coffee mug. I sat back down at my desk and looked at the text message my mother had sent. She had told me not to come crawling back when he became a billionaire. I smiled at the glowing screen. They had no idea what was about to happen. They thought they were holding all the cards. They thought they had successfully ruined my career while launching Preston into the upper echelons of the tech world. But they had actually handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy their false narrative once and for all. I did not need to confront them today. I just needed to let them enjoy their stolen glory for a little while longer before I completely burned it all straight to the ground forever. I closed the web browser on my phone and set the device face down on my desk. The initial shock of Preston stealing my artificial intelligence architecture had completely faded, leaving behind a cold, tactical clarity. I knew my brother was arrogant, but I had severely underestimated his sheer capacity for self-destruction. He had just handed me the key to his own undoing wrapped in a neat little package with a university bow on top. My first instinct was to immediately call my intellectual property lawyer and file an injunction against the university venture capital firm. But a swift legal cease and desist order would only result in a quiet settlement. My parents would sweep it under the rug, pay off whoever needed to be paid, and construct a new lie to protect their golden child. I needed something far more devastating. I needed an audience. Before I could begin drafting an email to my legal team, my phone vibrated against the desk. It was not a message from my mother or a call from my father. It was a notification from my personal social media account. A former colleague from my previous financial firm had tagged me in a video link. The message attached to the link read simply that I needed to see this right away. I unlocked my phone and tapped the notification. The application opened immediately, and the glossy, heavily filtered face of my sister-in-law filled the screen. Jasmine was sitting in what looked like the beautifully decorated living room of her luxury apartment. The lighting was perfectly arranged to catch the subtle shimmer of her designer blouse. She was not wearing her usual bold makeup. Instead, she had opted for a minimalist, bare-faced look that was clearly designed to make her appear vulnerable and exhausted. Jasmine stared directly into the camera lens with wide, watery eyes. She let out a deep, shaky breath before speaking. The performance was Oscar-worthy. "I want to talk about something incredibly difficult today," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I want to talk about overcoming familial toxicity and what happens when the people who should support you the most try to destroy your dreams." She paused to dab at the corner of her eye with a tissue, ensuring the camera captured the gesture perfectly. "For years, my husband has been working tirelessly on a revolutionary financial software model," she continued, feeding the lie with absolute conviction. "He sacrificed everything for this project. But his older sister, who works in the same industry, became consumed by jealousy. Because she is a childless, career-obsessed woman, she could not stand the thought of her younger brother achieving a success that rivaled her own." I watched the video in stunned silence as Jasmine spun a masterful modern narrative of victimization. She did not mention my name directly, but she provided enough specific details about my job and my status as a single corporate woman that anyone who knew our family would instantly know exactly who she was attacking. She painted me as a bitter gatekeeper who tried to financially abuse Preston and block his entrance into the tech industry out of sheer spite. She claimed I had actively tried to sabotage his university application. Then the video cut to a montage of Preston working late at night, looking stressed but determined, followed by a clip of his university acceptance letter. Jasmine reappeared on screen, smiling bravely through her fake tears. "But the truth always wins," she declared triumphantly. "Preston just secured a $500,000 grant for his brilliant software. We survived the toxicity, and we are building our legacy without her negative energy." I checked the metrics on the video. Jasmine had a modest but highly active following as a public relations influencer. However, the algorithm had grabbed hold of her compelling emotional narrative and pushed it onto the main discovery feed. The video had already amassed over 2 million views in just 48 hours. It was spreading like wildfire across multiple platforms. I scrolled through the comment section and felt a sudden sharp tightening in my chest. The responses were absolutely brutal. Thousands of strangers were tearing apart my character based entirely on the fabricated story. Comment after comment called me a jealous, miserable woman who could not handle seeing a man succeed. They called me a bitter spinster who was trying to punish her brother because she had failed to build a family of her own. Some users even praised Jasmine for her bravery in speaking out against toxic relatives. They validated her lies with thousands of heart emojis and words of encouragement. Jasmine had weaponized modern cancel culture and aimed it directly at my reputation. She had used her professional public relations skills to launch a preemptive smear campaign against me. She knew that if I ever tried to claim Preston had stolen my work, everyone would simply view it as the desperate actions of a jealous sister trying to tear down her successful brother. She had controlled the narrative before I even knew a narrative was being written. My hands gripped the edge of my desk as I read through a particularly vicious comment thread discussing how toxic corporate women always try to destroy young male innovators. The sheer injustice of the situation threatened to overwhelm my carefully maintained composure. My brother had stolen my actual life work, and his wife was using that theft to build her own personal brand, while simultaneously destroying my reputation in the public eye. They were profiting socially and financially off my stolen labor. I closed the application and took a slow, deliberate breath. The urge to react emotionally was incredibly strong. I wanted to post my own video screaming the truth to the world. I wanted to defend myself against the thousands of strangers calling me a monster. But I forced myself to step back and look at the larger strategic picture now. The larger strategic picture required patience, but my family was determined to test every single ounce of my self-control. The very next morning, the digital nightmare Jasmine had manufactured began bleeding directly into my real life. I walked through the glass doors of my financial consulting firm at exactly 8 in the morning, expecting to dive into my usual routine of data analysis and risk modeling. Instead, I was met with an atmosphere so tense it felt physically suffocating. The receptionist refused to meet my eyes when I walked past her desk. Several junior analysts who usually greeted me with warm smiles suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting as I walked down the main corridor. The air was thick with unspoken judgment. I reached my corner office, set my bag down, and barely had time to turn on my computer monitor before my desk phone rang. It was the Director of Human Resources requesting my immediate presence in the executive conference room. I knew exactly what this was about before I even opened the door. The Human Resources Director, a stern woman named Patricia, was sitting at the long mahogany table with her laptop open. Next to her sat one of the senior managing partners of the firm. They both looked incredibly grim. Patricia did not bother with pleasantries. She turned her laptop screen toward me and pressed play. Jasmine's tearful face filled the screen, sobbing about her toxic, bitter sister-in-law. "Internet sleuths are very thorough, Stella," Patricia said, her voice clipped and professional. "It took them less than 12 hours to match your sister-in-law's profile to your public professional network page. Our firm has been tagged in over 4,000 comments since midnight. People are leaving one-star reviews on our corporate profile, claiming we employ a woman who financially abuses her own family to gatekeep the technology sector." The senior partner leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. "We value your work, Stella," he said, choosing his words carefully. "You are one of our top artificial intelligence strategists. But our firm relies on maintaining an impeccable public image to secure venture capital contracts. This viral situation is becoming a significant liability for us. Clients are asking questions. They want to know if the woman handling their portfolios is the same woman going viral for toxic behavior." I sat perfectly still, keeping my posture completely relaxed despite the intense anger boiling in my veins. My family was actively destroying my livelihood. I looked directly at the senior partner. "The woman in that video is lying," I said calmly. "She is manipulating a false narrative to hide the fact that her husband, my brother, actually stole proprietary software from me. I am currently handling the situation through appropriate legal and structural channels. The video is a preemptive smear campaign designed to discredit me before I take action against them." Patricia sighed heavily. "Be that as it may, the court of public opinion does not wait for legal channels, Stella. We need this situation contained immediately, or we will have to discuss placing you on an unpaid administrative leave until the public backlash blows over. We cannot have our firm associated with a viral scandal." I nodded, understanding exactly what was at stake. "Give me a few days," I promised. "The situation will resolve itself permanently." They agreed to give me until the end of the week to handle the public relations nightmare. I walked out of the conference room, feeling the heavy, crushing weight of my family's betrayal pressing down on my shoulders. I retreated to my private office and closed the blinds, needing a moment of absolute silence. My career, my reputation, and my financial stability were all hanging by a single fragile thread because of a fabricated social media post. Just as I sat down behind my desk, my personal cell phone began to ring. I glanced at the caller identification. It was my father, William. He had not called me since he screamed at me in the lobby of the country club. For a brief, naive second, I thought maybe he had seen the viral video and realized Jasmine had gone too far. I thought maybe he was calling to apologize for the public humiliation his daughter-in-law was causing me. I answered the call and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello, Dad," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Stella," my father said. His voice was not apologetic. It was brimming with a dark, arrogant confidence. "Have you seen the internet today? The whole world sees exactly how bitter and toxic you really are. Everyone knows what kind of person you are now." I gripped the armrest of my chair. "You mean the completely fabricated video your daughter-in-law posted?" I asked. "The one where she lies to millions of strangers to cover up the fact that Preston is a thief." "Do not use that word," my father snapped aggressively. "Preston is a visionary. He is taking this family to the next level while you sit around being jealous." "But I am a reasonable man, Stella. I am calling to offer you a way out of this mess. I can make this whole public relations nightmare disappear for you. I know how much you care about your precious corporate job." I narrowed my eyes, staring blankly at the wall. "A way out," I repeated. "What exactly do you mean by that?" My father chuckled, a harsh grating sound that made my skin crawl. "It is very simple," he said. "You currently hold a 10% ownership stake in your late grandfather's lake house. You have been holding on to it for years, refusing to sell. Preston needs immediate operational capital to launch his new software company. He needs to hire developers and rent an office space before the university venture capital funds completely clear. You are going to formally sign your 10% stake of that property over to Preston right now." I stared at the wall of my office, letting my father's extortion demand echo in the quiet room. He wanted me to hand over the only remaining piece of my grandfather's legacy to fund a thief. The lake house was not just a property, it was the place where my grandfather had taught me how to play chess and how to think strategically. My father wanted me to surrender my 10% ownership stake so Preston could drain its equity and play pretend executive. I gripped the phone tighter and took a slow breath. "I am not signing anything over to Preston," I replied, my voice steady. "You are out of your mind if you think you can blackmail me into funding his fraudulent lifestyle." My father scoffed loudly on the other end of the line. "You do not have a choice, Stella," he threatened. "Jasmine has thousands of followers. That video is already destroying your reputation at your corporate job. I can have her take it down today. I can have her post a public apology saying it was all a big misunderstanding. All you have to do is transfer the deed to your brother. He needs that operational capital immediately. The venture capital funds from the university will take a few weeks to clear, and he needs to hire a development team right now." I felt a sharp spike of genuine anger pierce through my calm exterior. "You are actively trying to extort your own daughter," I stated clearly, making sure he heard exactly what he was doing. "You are using a fabricated social media smear campaign to blackmail me out of my property." "It is not blackmail." My father snapped, his tone turning vicious. "It is family reallocation of resources. You are being selfish. You have a lucrative career, and you are hoarding wealth while your brother is trying to build something magnificent. He is a visionary, Stella. He has secured a $500,000 grant. He is going to make this family incredibly wealthy, and you are just jealous that he did it without your help." "He did not do anything without my help," I fired back, refusing to hold my tongue any longer. "He did not build a groundbreaking artificial intelligence financial model, Dad. He stole it. He stole it from me." The line went dead silent for a fraction of a second before my father burst into loud, mocking laughter. The sound grated against my ears. "You are truly pathetic, Stella," he sneered. "You are so consumed by jealousy that you are actually trying to claim credit for his genius. You cannot stand the fact that your younger brother is smarter than you. You cannot stand that he secured a $500,000 while you are just a corporate drone working for someone else." I kept my voice deadly calm. "Listen to me very carefully, Dad. I am giving you a warning right now. Preston is playing a highly dangerous game. The software architecture he submitted to the university venture capital firm is my exact proprietary project. He stole my files from my laptop during the country club dinner while you and Mom were busy demanding I pay his tuition. It is stolen intellectual property." My father laughed again, even louder. "You have absolutely no proof of that," he taunted. "You are just making up wild stories because you are backed into a corner. Preston worked on that project for months in his home office. Jasmine watched him do it. She will testify to it. You have nothing but your own bitter lies. No one is going to believe a toxic, jealous sister over a recognized university scholar. If he pitches that stolen software to the venture capital firm and accepts their money, he is committing federal wire fraud, I warned, trying to make him understand the gravity of the situation. He is going to end up in prison, Dad. Stop him before he destroys his entire life. You are just trying to scare us because you know you have lost my father, growled, his amusement vanishing. You will not ruin this for him, Stella. We will not let you. You either sign over your 10% stake of the lake house by tomorrow morning, or I will have Jasmine make another video. I will have her name your consulting firm directly. I will make sure you lose your job and never work in the financial sector again. We will see you in court, Stella. He hung up the phone with a loud click. I pulled the phone away from my ear and set it down on the wood of my desk. The silence in my office felt heavy and suffocating. My own father had just threatened to destroy my career and ruin my life if I did not surrender my assets to fund my brother's stolen enterprise. He did not care about the truth. He did not care about my hard work or my safety. He only cared about protecting Preston and maintaining the fake image of their perfect golden child. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city skyline. I was pushed to the absolute edge. I had tried to walk away from them. I had tried to maintain my distance and let them live their delusional lives. But they were not going to stop. They were actively trying to steal my intellectual property, to defraud a major university, and they were willing to destroy my professional reputation, to extort my personal assets. Jasmine was using her platform to paint me a villain. My father was using intimidation and blackmail. My mother was enabling a thief. And Preston was sitting back letting them all do his dirty work while he prepared to accept $500,000 for software he did not even know how to code. I realized with clarity that I could not ignore them. I could not just block their numbers and hope they would eventually tire themselves out and move on to their next victim. They were actively weaponizing public opinion and attempting to leverage my own hard-earned assets to bankroll my brother. My father had drawn a very clear line in the sand. He was willing to sacrifice my entire career and my financial stability just to protect Preston from his own incompetence. I sat back down at my desk and opened a new browser tab. I needed a ruthless intellectual property litigator. I needed a legal team capable of bringing down a massive hammer on my brother before he could officially sign those venture capital documents and drag my proprietary artificial intelligence software into a public domain dispute. I started typing the names of the top corporate law firms in the city. I reached for a legal pad and grabbed my favorite heavy metal pen. I began drafting a timeline of events, the country club dinner, the specific timestamp of the security breach on my laptop, the exact moment Jasmine uploaded her defamatory video, the extortion phone call from my father. I documented every single detail with cold corporate efficiency. I was preparing for war. My family wanted to see me in court, and I was more than happy to oblige them. Just as I wrote down the final timestamp, my personal cell phone began to ring. The sudden noise shattered the heavy silence of my office. I glanced at the glowing screen expecting to see another aggressive text message from my mother, or perhaps a gloating call from Jasmine. Instead, the caller identification displayed a local area code followed by a phone number I did not immediately recognize. The name below the number read simply, University Administration. My hand hovered over the device. Why would the university be calling me? My mother had already made her grand public announcement about my supposed generosity regarding the tuition, but I had assumed the financial aid office would reach out via email if they had questions. I almost let the call go to voicemail. I was in no mood to deal with aggressive billing departments trying to collect on promises I never made. But a strange instinct told me to pick up. I pressed the green accept button and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello, this is Stella Miller," I answered, keeping my voice crisp and professional. "Ms. Miller," a deep, authoritative voice replied on the other end of the line. "My name is Dr. Alistair Reed. I am the director of the Venture Capital Fund, partnered with the University Business School. I am also the graduate professor of your brother Preston." The sound of his name sent a sharp spike of adrenaline straight through my chest. I sat up straighter in my chair, pushing the legal pad away. My mind raced through a dozen different scenarios. Had my father somehow managed to put my contact information down as a financial guarantor for the program? Was Dr. Reed calling to confirm the transfer of funds for the tuition? "Good afternoon, Dr. Reed," I said carefully, measuring every single word. "If you are calling regarding the tuition of my brother, I must inform you that I am not his financial sponsor. I have not agreed to pay for his degree, and any documentation stating otherwise is completely invalid." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of keyboard keys clacking in the background of his office. "I am not calling about his tuition, Ms. Miller," Dr. Reed said. His voice was stern and carried a distinct note of professional confusion. "I am calling regarding the final due diligence check for the Future Innovators Seed Funding Grant. As you may know, your brother was recently awarded a preliminary grant of $500,000 based on a groundbreaking financial software model he submitted to our innovation board." "Yes, I am aware of the press release," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. I waited for him to continue. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and steady. "We are currently finalizing the legal paperwork for the commercial grant disbursement," Dr. Reed explained. "A's part of our standard security protocol for venture capital funding. My technical team runs a deep diagnostic scan on all digital submissions. We need to verify the integrity of the code before we transfer $500,000 to a student startup." "That is a very sound business practice," I agreed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Dr. Reed let out a long, frustrated sigh. "Ms. Miller, we ran the diagnostic scan on the raw files your brother submitted. Our technical auditors found something highly irregular buried deep within the software architecture. I am looking at the audit report right now. The embedded metadata and the back-end application programming interface keys do not match the credentials of your brother. In fact, they all trace back to a registered corporate identification number under your exact name. Why are you listed as the original author of this project?" The room around me seemed to stop spinning. The magnitude of what had just happened hit me like a tidal wave of pure adrenaline. My brother was too stupid to realize that I never leave my digital assets unprotected. I smiled. "Because that software belongs to me," I answered confidently. "He stole it from my laptop during a family dinner." Dr. Reed went completely silent. I could almost hear his sharp intake of breath across the line as he realized the sheer scale of the deception. "He is attempting to commit federal wire fraud against your fund," I continued. "My family thought they could destroy me, but they handed me the ultimate weapon instead." "We need to arrange a private meeting right away," Dr. Reed demanded. I arrived at the university campus less than 40 minutes after hanging up the phone. Dr. Reed had a private executive suite located in the upper levels of the graduate business building overlooking the central courtyard. When I walked through his heavy oak door, I found him pacing behind a massive mahogany desk. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s with sharp gray eyes and the kind of stern presence that commanded immediate respect. He did not look like a standard academic professor. He looked exactly like what he was, which was a ruthless Silicon Valley venture capitalist who did not tolerate having his time wasted. "Ms. Miller," he said, stopping his pacing to gesture toward a leather chair opposite his desk. "Please sit down. I need you to explain exactly how your proprietary corporate credentials ended up embedded in a student submission that is currently slated to receive $500,000 from my investors." I took a seat and crossed my legs, settling into the chair with the same calm confidence I brought to my own corporate boardrooms. I did not apologize, and I did not flinch under his intense scrutiny. "Before I explain the technical details, Dr. Reed, I need you to understand exactly who you are dealing with." I began, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I am a senior financial strategist at one of the top consulting firms in this city. I build predictive artificial intelligence models that optimize risk assessment for multi-million-dollar asset portfolios. My brother Preston, on the other hand, is a 30-year-old man who has never written a single line of code in his entire life. He survives on financial bailouts from my parents and plays the role of an entrepreneur while actively avoiding actual labor." Dr. Reed narrowed his eyes, sitting down slowly in his own chair. You are telling me that he stole this entire architecture from you. He stole it directly from my personal laptop during a family dinner 3 weeks ago, I confirmed. My family has a long documented history of boundary stomping and financial entitlement. They view my success as a community resource for them to exploit. Because I handle highly sensitive corporate data, every day I am naturally paranoid about security. I know my brother better than anyone else. I knew he was desperate for operational capital to fund his new lifestyle with his wife. So when I brought my work laptop to that dinner, I made sure my files were protected by something much stronger than a standard password. Dr. Reed leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. He looked intrigued now, the initial anger shifting into professional curiosity. What exactly did you do, Ms. Miller? I smiled a cold, calculated smile. I embedded a custom Trojan horse script directly into the source code of my financial model, I explained. It is a completely legal security protocol designed to protect intellectual property from unauthorized corporate espionage. If someone simply views the files on my authorized machine, nothing happens. The presentation runs perfectly smoothly. But if a person copies those raw files onto a portable drive and attempts to compile the code on an unregistered external network, the Trojan horse wakes up. It acts as a silent digital tripwire. Dr. Reed picked up a printed copy of the technical audit report from his desk, his eyes scanning the pages with renewed understanding. And what exactly does this tripwire do when it activates, he asked. It executes a deep background protocol, I replied. First, it immediately pings my personal server with the exact internet protocol address of the unauthorized machine attempting to run the software. Second, it initiates a hard-coding sequence. It takes my registered corporate identification number, my legal name, and my copyright credentials, and burns them directly into the deepest layers of the metadata. It permanently brands the files as my stolen property. It makes it mathematically impossible for the thief to scrub the files clean because the watermark is woven into the very fabric of the predictive algorithm itself. Dr. Reed stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The silence in the office was absolute. He looked down at the audit report and then back up at me. He ran his hand over his face, letting out a breath that sounded like a mixture of shock and genuine professional admiration. Ms. Miller, he said, his voice dropping lower. Our technical auditors found those exact credentials buried in the back-end application programming interface keys. We traced the compilation history. The log shows that the files were first booted up on an external unregistered network at a residential address in the suburbs exactly 3 weeks ago. That is my brother's home address, I stated firmly. He took my life work and brought it straight to his home office. He assumed he could just delete my name from the title slide and trick your innovation board into giving him a massive grant. He had absolutely no idea that by uploading that file to your university server, he was handing you a literal digital confession of his theft. The realization settled over the room like a heavy stone. Preston had walked into one of the most prestigious business schools in the country and confidently presented a stolen project to a room full of venture capitalists. He had smiled for the cameras and accepted the praise of academic elites, completely unaware that every single piece of data he provided was screaming my name behind the scenes. Dr. Reed shook his head slowly, a dark look crossing his features. Your brother signed a preliminary contract with our fund yesterday afternoon, he said, his tone turning icy. He legally certified that the intellectual property was his own original creation. He accepted a $10,000 university stipend as an advance on the grant to cover his immediate legal and filing fees. I leaned forward, resting my hands firmly upon his huge desk. Looking directly into his sharp gray eyes. Dr. Reed picked up the preliminary contract and stared at Preston's signature. The ink was barely dry. The audacity of a student attempting to defraud a venture capital fund was unprecedented. His reputation was built on spotting visionary talent and eliminating risk. Preston had insulted his intelligence by bringing a stolen corporate algorithm into his office and passing it off as homework. The silence broke when Dr. Reed slammed the contract down on the mahogany wood. His face was rigid with fury. This is completely unacceptable, he stated, his voice vibrating with anger. Academic dishonesty is one thing, but attempting to defraud our investors is an entirely different level of stupidity. I am calling the University Disciplinary Committee right now. He reached for the heavy black desk phone. I will have him expelled before lunch. I will revoke the scholarship and ensure everyone knows why he was thrown out. I watched him pick up the phone receiver. A normal person would have let him make the call. Getting Preston expelled and humiliated by the dean would be a massive victory. It would immediately stop him from accessing the grant. But I am a financial strategist, and I do not settle for small victories when complete annihilation is on the table. If Dr. Reed expelled my brother today behind closed doors, my family would hijack the narrative. They would twist the truth to fit their delusional reality. Wait, I said sharply, reaching across the desk and pressing my hand firmly down on the phone receiver. Do not make that call. Dr. Reed paused, looking at my hand and then up at my face. Ms. Miller, your brother stole your proprietary software and used it to secure a lucrative grant. He is currently walking around my campus accepting congratulations for your hard work. Why would you want to stop me from expelling him? I pulled my hand back and stood up straight, smoothing my blazer. Because expelling him right now is the worst strategic move, I explained, keeping my tone measured. If you throw him out today, my family will simply spin it as a massive misunderstanding. My sister-in-law Jasmine has already launched a coordinated social media smear campaign against me. If you expel Preston quietly, she will make another viral video. She will tell her followers that the corrupt university system sided with a jealous corporate sister to crush a young entrepreneur. My parents will hire lawyers to threaten defamation lawsuits. They will turn Preston into a martyr, and I will spend the next 5 years defending my professional reputation in civil court. Dr. Reed slowly lowered the phone receiver back onto its base. He crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back in his chair. He was a ruthless venture capitalist, and I could see his analytical mind processing the logic of my argument. What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Miller? He asked, his tone shifting from angry to dangerously curious. I am proposing that we let him dig his own grave, I said. A grave so deep that no one in my family can ever pull him out of it. I pointed to the contract sitting on his desk. You just told me he signed that document yesterday. He accepted a $10,000 stipend advance from your fund. Did those funds transfer across state lines? Dr. Reed nodded slowly. Our primary financial institution is located in California. The funds were wired directly into his checking account this morning. I smiled a cold, humorless smile. Then this is no longer just an academic plagiarism issue, Dr. Reed. My brother used stolen corporate intellectual property to fraudulently secure financial assets across state lines. That is the exact legal definition of federal wire fraud. It is a serious felony. Dr. Reed let out a low whistle, running his hand over his chin. He is scheduled to deliver his final investor pitch this Friday, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. He is supposed to present the software architecture to our entire board of directors to secure the final release of the seed funding. Exactly, I replied. Let him do it. Let him walk into that boardroom on Friday. Let him stand in front of your venture capital board and confidently present my artificial intelligence model. Let him verbally claim full ownership of the stolen code on the official corporate record. The higher he climbs, the harder the fall will be. If you expose him in front of all your investors with my family, sitting right there in the front row watching him, there will be no room to spin a fake narrative. We will catch him committing fraud in real time. The corner of Dr. Reed's mouth twitched upward into a sharp, predatory smile. He completely understood the assignment. He realized that exposing a fraudster during a live corporate pitch would not only protect the university from backlash, but it would also send a powerful message to anyone else who ever thought about scamming his venture fund. I like the way you think, Miss Miller, Dr. Reed said, leaning forward to clasp his hands together. You have a ruthless approach to problem solving. We will proceed exactly as you suggested. We will let your brother pitch his stolen project on Friday afternoon. But how do you plan to get yourself into that private boardroom without raising his suspicion? Your family will try to keep you away from his moment of glory. I picked up my purse and slung the strap over my shoulder. Leave my family completely to me, I said confidently. They are incredibly predictable. They thrive on feeling superior. I just need to swallow my pride and play the role of the defeated sister begging for forgiveness. I will make sure I am sitting right there in the back of the room when the federal hammer drops. I left Dr. Reed's office feeling a profound sense of anticipation. The trap was set and the university was fully on board, but the hardest part of my strategy was still ahead of me. I walked across the manicured campus lawns toward my car, pulling my phone from my pocket. My family was incredibly predictable, but they were also highly defensive. Right now, they thought they had won. They thought Jasmine's viral video and my father's extortion attempts had successfully broken my spirit. To guarantee they would let me into that venture capital boardroom on Friday, I needed to give them exactly what they craved the most. I needed to hand them my absolute surrender. I sat in the driver's seat of my car and stared at the family group chat. The last message sent in this thread was from my mother 3 weeks ago, demanding I apologize for disrespecting my brother at the country club. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I had spent my entire life refusing to bow down to their toxic demands. Now I was about to deliberately throw myself at their feet. I took a deep breath and began to type out the most agonizingly fake apology of my entire life. I kept the message carefully balanced between desperate and submissive. I wrote that the public backlash from Jasmine's video had severely damaged my career and made me realize how wrong I was to harbor so much jealousy. I typed out a long paragraph about how Preston truly was a visionary and how I was deeply ashamed of trying to hold him back. I explicitly stated that I had let my bitter feelings about being a single woman cloud my judgment regarding his incredible success. Every single word tasted like poison in my mouth, but I knew it was exactly the kind of validation my mother needed to hear. I concluded the message with a pathetic plea. I asked if I could please be allowed to attend his final investor pitch on Friday afternoon. I promised I would not cause a scene and said I just wanted to be there to support my brother and witness his triumphant moment. I hit send and watched the little green bubble appear on the screen. The waiting was the most agonizing part of the entire operation. I drove back to my townhouse, leaving my phone on the passenger seat. I knew they would not respond immediately. My mother would want to let me sweat. She would likely call a family meeting to discuss my sudden surrender. Jasmine would probably try to convince them to keep me away, arguing that I was too toxic to be allowed near Preston's big moment. But I knew my mother's psychology better than anyone. Deborah was a narcissist who thrived on public displays of dominance. Having her successful independent daughter standing in the back of a room watching her golden child secure a $500,000 grant was simply too tempting an opportunity for her to pass up. She would want me there as a living, breathing trophy of her superior parenting skills. I walked into my kitchen and poured myself a glass of ice water, checking the screen of my phone every few minutes. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour, then 2 hours. Finally, a notification chimed through the quiet kitchen. It was a reply in the family group chat from my mother. I opened the message and felt a cold smile stretch across my face. She had taken the bait hook, line, and sinker. Her response was a masterpiece of condescension and maternal superiority. "I am glad you have finally come to your senses, Stella," she wrote. "It takes a big person to admit when they are completely wrong. Preston has been incredibly gracious about your toxic behavior, and he is willing to let you witness his success. You can come to the presentation on Friday, but you will stand in the very back of the room and keep your mouth shut. Do not try to speak to the investors. Do not try to ruin his big moment. Maybe if you pay close attention, you will learn something about how real business is actually conducted in the modern world." I read the message twice, savoring the sheer absolute arrogance of her words. She genuinely believed she had broken me. She believed her golden boy was untouchable. I immediately typed back a brief submissive reply, thanking her for her immense generosity and promising to remain completely silent at the back of the room. I set my phone down on the granite kitchen counter and laughed softly into the empty room. They had just given me a front-row ticket to their own destruction. The next 2 days moved at an agonizingly slow pace. I went to work and ignored the lingering stares from my colleagues who had seen Jasmine's viral video. My human resources director sent me an email asking for an update on the public relations situation. I replied with a simple promise that the entire ordeal would be permanently resolved by Friday evening. I spent my evenings finalizing the technical aspects of my trap. I remotely accessed my corporate server and verified that the Trojan horse script had successfully locked my copyright credentials into Preston's stolen presentation files. The digital watermark was solid, flawless, and entirely undeniable. There was no way he could scrub the metadata before the pitch. On Thursday night, I stood in front of my bedroom closet, selecting my armor for the main event. I bypassed my standard office wear and pulled out my sharpest designer power suit. It was a striking charcoal gray two-piece that radiated authority and absolute confidence. If I was going to stand in the back of a venture capital boardroom and watch my brother commit federal wire fraud, I was going to do it looking like the executive I truly was. I laid the suit out perfectly, preparing for the climax of this long, bitter war. Tomorrow, my family would learn the true cost of their entitlement. Friday morning arrived with clear skies over the city. I woke up feeling an intense electric energy coursing through my veins. The long week of carefully orchestrated silence and pretending to be broken had finally reached its end. I showered and dressed with meticulous precision, putting on the charcoal gray designer power suit I had laid out the night before. I applied my makeup to look sharp and professional, masking any trace of the emotional turmoil my family assumed I was suffering. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was not a defeated sister seeking forgiveness. She was a corporate executioner stepping onto the battlefield. I grabbed my leather briefcase containing the backup verification files for my software and walked out the door. Today was the day my family would finally face the absolute destruction of their carefully crafted delusions. I felt completely prepared. I drove into the downtown financial district, navigating through heavy afternoon traffic. The venture capital firm partnered with the university was located on the 42nd floor of a massive glass and steel high-rise building. It was an intimidating structure designed to make anyone walking through its doors feel small and insignificant. I handed my keys to the building valet and rode the high-speed elevator up to the executive suites. The reception area was a minimalist expanse of white marble and brushed steel. A polite receptionist checked my identification and directed me down a long, silent corridor toward the primary boardroom. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished floor. Every step brought me closer to the culmination of my trap. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the boardroom and stepped inside. The room was breathtaking. A massive custom-built mahogany table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by plush, ergonomic leather chairs. The back wall was entirely made of glass, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. At the front of the room, a state-of-the-art presentation screen was ready to display Preston's stolen project. Dr. Reed was standing near the front, talking quietly with two other venture capital board members. And sitting right there in the very first row of spectator seats was my family. They were dressed in their absolute best clothing, looking like they owned the entire building. Jasmine was holding her phone up on a portable tripod ring light. She was wearing a stunning emerald green dress and speaking softly but enthusiastically into her camera lens. I could hear snippets of her live stream as I walked closer. "We are here at the venture capital headquarters, you guys," she whispered to her thousands of followers. "My brilliant husband is about to step up to that podium and secure $500,000 for his software company. We are so blessed to be building this legacy together after removing so much toxic energy from our lives." She was literally monetizing my stolen intellectual property in real time, using my brother's impending felony to boost her own public relations brand and secure more sponsorships. My mother, Deborah, spotted me first. She tapped my father on the arm and pointed in my direction. They both turned in their seats to look at me. The smug satisfaction radiating from their faces was absolutely nauseating. My mother looked me up and down, taking in my professional suit with a dismissive smirk. She actually believed I had dressed up just to show my respect for Preston's genius. She stood up and walked a few steps toward me, blocking my path to the front rows. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "I am glad you wore something nice, Stella. It shows you are finally taking your brother seriously. Now remember what we agreed upon in the group chat. You are going to go sit quietly in the very back row. You will not speak to any of the investors, and you will not cause a scene. This is his moment, and we will not let your bitter jealousy ruin it." My father William leaned over his seat and added his own threatening remark. "Just keep your head down, Stella," he warned, his eyes narrowing. "You are only here because Preston is a forgiving man. Do not make us regret letting you into this building." I looked at my parents, taking in their sheer, unadulterated arrogance. They were treating me like a defeated peasant who had crawled into the room to beg for scraps from the golden child's table. They genuinely thought my silence was submission. They had absolutely no idea that I was just letting them dig their graves a few feet deeper before I pushed them all in. I did not argue with them. I gave my mother a small, tight smile and nodded my head once. "Of course, Mom," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even. I would not dream of interrupting him. "I will go sit right in the back just like you asked." I walked past them, ignoring the victorious little laugh my mother let out. I made my way to the furthest row of chairs near the heavy glass entry doors. I sat down and placed my briefcase on the floor next to my feet. Jasmine caught my eye from the front row and offered a mocking little wave before turning back to her live stream audience. Preston finally walked into the room through a side door. I was wearing a custom-tailored suit that my parents had undoubtedly purchased for him just for this occasion. He looked incredibly handsome and utterly confident. He shook hands with Dr. Reed and the other board members, flashing his bright, charismatic smile. My family beamed with overwhelming pride. I crossed my legs, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. The trap was locked and the timer had just run out. My revenge was finally about to unfold right in front of them. The room fell completely silent as Dr. Reed took his seat at the center of the long mahogany table. He gestured toward the front of the room, signaling that the presentation could begin. Preston adjusted his expensive silk tie and stepped confidently up to the sleek acrylic podium. He did not look nervous. He tapped the spacebar on the presentation laptop, and the massive screen behind him illuminated the dark room. The title slide of my artificial intelligence project glowed in crisp high definition. My original title had been replaced with something flashy and entirely meaningless. He called it the Quantum Financial Integration Matrix. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud at the absolute absurdity of the new name. "Good afternoon, esteemed members of the Venture Capital Board." Preston began, his voice booming with practiced theatrical resonance. "Today, I am not just going to pitch you a software product. I am going to offer you the key to unlocking the next evolution of global wealth management. We are standing on the precipice of a new era, and I have built the bridge that will take us across." He clicked a button on a small wireless remote, and the screen transitioned to the first major data slide. It was a beautiful, complex web of predictive neural network architecture. It represented hundreds of hours of my blood, sweat, and tears. I had debugged that specific sequence on a rainy Tuesday morning at 3 o'clock while surviving on stale coffee. Seeing it displayed behind my brother felt incredibly surreal. Preston began to pace slowly across the front of the room. He moved with the fluid grace of a seasoned corporate executive. He pointed casually at a series of complex algorithmic formulas on the screen. "As you can see here in the primary diagnostic node, my architecture utilizes a self-repairing machine learning loop," he said smoothly. "It analyzes market volatility metrics across 14 different international exchanges simultaneously. It isolates risk factors before human analysts even know a market shift is occurring." He was reciting the exact summary notes I had written in my private project journal. He had memorized my summary bullet points and was now delivering them with flawless precision. But I could tell by the slight hesitation in his eyes whenever he gestured toward the actual math that he had absolutely no idea what any of those numbers meant. I was just a highly attractive parrot repeating words he had memorized the night before. The venture capital board members were leaning forward in their plush leather chairs. They were captivated by his performance. They took notes on their digital tablets, occasionally nodding in agreement as Preston confidently navigated through the dense financial terminology. He threw out buzzwords like decentralized ledger integration and predictive quantitative synthesis with reckless abandon. It was an incredibly polished illusion. I was giving the performance of a lifetime, and the investors were buying every single second of it. Dr. Reed sat perfectly still at the center of the panel. His face was an unreadable mask of academic neutrality. He did not take any notes. He just watched my brother with cold, calculating eyes, knowing exactly what was actually happening behind the scenes. Dr. Reed was simply waiting for the perfect moment to drop the guillotine on my brother. I shifted my gaze away from the presentation screen and looked at my family sitting in the front row. They were practically vibrating with overwhelming joy. My father William was sitting up incredibly straight. His chest was puffed out with immense pride. He looked at Preston the way he had always wanted to look at me. It was the look of a parent watching their child conquer the world. Beside him, my mother Deborah had a triumphant smile plastered across her face. She looked like a queen watching her chosen prince ascend to the throne. Jasmine was sitting on the edge of her seat, holding her phone up to record the entire pitch. She was capturing every single second of her husband stealing my intellectual property so she could broadcast his fraudulent genius to her thousands of followers. Right in the middle of a particularly complex slide, detailing artificial intelligence market predictions. My mother slowly turned her head around to look at me. She sought me out in the shadows of the back row. When her eyes locked onto mine, her smile widened into a malicious, mocking smirk. She tilted her head slightly, raising her eyebrows in a silent, taunting gesture. She was telling me to look at him. She was silently demanding that I acknowledge my absolute defeat. She wanted me to feel small, bitter, and completely crushed by her golden child. I did not look away. I held her gaze and offered her a very slow, very polite nod. I kept my face entirely blank, yielding nothing. She turned back around to face the podium, looking incredibly satisfied with herself. She thought my calm demeanor was the ultimate sign of my total submission. Preston moved toward the climax of his presentation. The screen shifted to the final slide showing projected revenue margins and scalability metrics. I had designed those projections to secure a massive corporate contract for my firm. Now my brother was using them to justify a $500,000 grant for a fake company. He lowered his voice to a serious, passionate register, looking directly at the venture capital investors. "This software is not just a tool," he said, placing a hand over his heart. "It is the culmination of my life work. I have poured everything I have into this architecture. I am respectfully asking you to partner with me today to take this bold vision and turn it into a global reality." He paused, letting the heavy silence stretch across the large room for maximum dramatic effect. He smiled broadly, waiting for their applause. "And that is how we change the future of finance." The room erupts into thunderous applause as my brother finishes his final sentence. The wealthy venture capital investors rise to their feet, clapping enthusiastically for the pitch they just witnessed. My father William stands up first, clapping so hard his hands must physically hurt. My mother Deborah wipes a highly theatrical tear from her cheek, looking around the room to make sure everyone sees her immense maternal pride. Jasmine angles her smartphone camera to capture the standing ovation, making sure to get herself perfectly in the frame, looking like the proud, supportive wife of a tech visionary. Preston soaks it all in. He bows his head slightly, feigning humility, but his chest is puffed out with sheer, unadulterated arrogance. He genuinely believes he has won. He thinks he has successfully navigated the biggest lie of his entire life and secured $500,000 in funding. I watch from the back row, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. My mother turns around one more time to look at me in the shadows. She points at Preston and mouths the words, "I told you so." I do not react. I just wait. The applause finally dies down. The wealthy investors take their seats, murmuring excitedly to one another about market potential and massive returns on investment. Preston steps away from the podium, unbuttoning his suit jacket with a relaxed, confident swagger. He looks toward the panel of judges, waiting for them to officially hand over the money. Dr. Alistair Reed stands up from the center of the massive mahogany table. He buttons his own jacket and looks directly at my brother. "That was an absolutely incredible presentation, Preston," Dr. Reed says. His voice is rich and echoes clearly across the silent boardroom. "The architecture of this artificial intelligence model is truly genius. It is unlike anything we have seen from a student submission in the history of this venture capital fund. You have completely reimagined predictive quantitative synthesis. Preston smiles a wide, bright grin. Thank you, Dr. Reed, he replies smoothly. It has been a long, difficult journey, but seeing the potential impact makes all the hard work completely worthwhile. I am just glad I could finally bring this vision to life today. Dr. Reed nods slowly. His expression remains entirely professional, but I can see the sharp, dangerous edge in his gray eyes. Indeed, Dr. Reed says. However, as standard protocol, before we wire $500,000 in commercial seed funding across state lines, we have one final security measure. I need to defer to our lead technical auditor to officially approve the final software architecture. We must ensure the proprietary code is completely sound before the transaction is legally binding and the funds are dispersed into your corporate accounts. Preston nods enthusiastically, still playing the part of the seasoned executive. Of course, Dr. Reed, he says, gesturing openly toward the panel of judges. I am fully prepared to answer any technical questions your auditor might have right now. Please bring them on. I built every single part of this system myself, so I know it inside and out. Preston looks toward the other professors at the table, expecting one of them to stand up and ask about basic data structures. My parents also look toward the panel, eager to watch their golden child dazzle another academic with his fake knowledge. Jasmine keeps recording, streaming this monumental moment to her thousands of followers online. They are all completely oblivious to the trap closing around them. Instead of turning to his colleagues, Dr. Reed turns his body completely around. He looks past the front row where my family is sitting. He looks past the wealthy investors. He looks directly to the very back of the room where I am sitting quietly in my charcoal gray designer power suit with my hands folded neatly in my lap. The entire room follows his gaze. Dozens of eyes turn to look at me. My mother frowns in deep confusion. She looks at me and then looks back at the panel, trying to understand why the director of the venture capital fund is paying attention to the sister she forced to sit in the back. My father leans forward in his leather chair, his brow furrowing with sudden suspicion. Jasmine lowers her phone slightly, the glowing screen dipping toward the floor as she realizes something is not right. Preston stands at the front of the room, his confident smile suddenly freezing on his face. His hands drop slowly to his sides. He has absolutely no idea what is happening, but he can feel the shift in the atmosphere. The air in the room grows incredibly tense and cold. Dr. Reed raises his hand and gestures directly toward me. Ms. Miller, Dr. Reed says, his voice cutting through the thick, heavy silence of the boardroom like a sharp razor blade. If you would please take the floor. The moment hangs suspended in time. The air feels completely electrified. My parents stare at me in absolute shock. They told me to come here and sit in the back like a defeated peasant. They told me to keep my mouth shut and learn something about real business from my brilliant younger brother. They thought I was here to beg for scraps of their approval. I slowly uncross my legs and stand up from my chair. I pick up my heavy leather briefcase from the floor. The sound of my heels echoes sharply against the hardwood floor as I step into the center aisle. I do not look at my parents. I do not look at Jasmine. I keep my eyes locked entirely on my brother, who is suddenly looking very pale. Preston opens his mouth to speak, but no words come out. He grips the edges of the acrylic podium, his knuckles turning white. The illusion of his success is rapidly fracturing. I walk down the long aisle toward the front of the boardroom. My revenge has begun. Every head in that massive glass-walled boardroom turned to follow my movement. The clicking of my heels against the hardwood floor was the only sound cutting through the suffocating silence. Passing the front row, I saw my mother Deborah physically recoil. Her jaw dropped open, ruining her curated posture of maternal superiority. The triumphant smirk she wore vanished instantly, replaced by sheer panic. Beside her, my father William gripped his leather chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. He opened his mouth to order me down, but his voice failed him. He was paralyzed by the shift in power. Jasmine, my ambitious African-American sister-in-law, was still holding her smartphone on its ring light tripod. She had been live streaming to her thousands of followers. As I walked past, she stared at me with terrified eyes. Her grip faltered. The smartphone slipped out of her manicured hand and clattered against the polished floor. The screen cracked, sending a sharp noise echoing across the silent room. She scrambled to pick it up, her persona shattering in real time. She knew what my presence meant. Her fabricated social media narrative about her husband was about to be destroyed live on camera. I did not stop walking. I ignored her broken phone. I kept my eyes locked ahead. I reached the front and stepped up to the acrylic podium. Preston physically backed away from me. The swagger he displayed during his pitch evaporated into thin air. He looked like a cornered animal searching for a non-existent exit. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his expensive grooming. He looked frantically toward the investors and then at his professor. "Dr. Reed, what is going on here?" Preston stammered, pitching up an octave in panic. "What is she doing up here? She is just my sister. She does not work for your fund. She has absolutely no business being involved in my evaluation. You need to ask her to leave right now." Dr. Reed remained seated at the center of the table. He did not look at my brother. He folded his hands together, watching me with intense professional anticipation. He completely ignored Preston, brushing off his desperate demands, as if my brother were nothing more than an annoying insect buzzing in the background. The investors sitting around the table exchanged confused glances, but remained quiet. They were corporate sharks and could smell blood in the water. They knew a major revelation was about to unfold, and they were eager to watch the execution. I did not wait for Dr. Reed to offer me a formal introduction. I took absolute total control of the room. I set my heavy leather briefcase down on the floor next to the podium and pulled out my encrypted tablet. I reached over and deliberately unplugged the primary interface cable from Preston's presentation laptop. I firmly plugged the digital cable directly into my own device. The massive screen behind us flickered black for a second before syncing with my secure corporate system. Preston reached out his hand, trembling slightly, as if he wanted to pull the cable away from me. "Stella, what are you doing?" he hissed under his breath, leaning in close so the investors would not hear. "You promised Mom you would sit in the back and keep quiet. You are ruining my entire pitch." I turned to face my brother. We stood shoulder to shoulder at the front of the boardroom, but the distance between us had never been greater. I looked at his expensive tailored suit, the suit my parents had purchased to help him play this fraudulent role. I looked at the terror swimming in his eyes. He was finally realizing he could not charm his way out of this situation. There was no parental bailout coming to save him today. I raised my voice, ensuring everyone, including the wealthy investors and my family, could hear clearly. "I do not work for the venture capital fund, Preston." I stated, my voice echoing with cold, absolute authority. "But I do own the software architecture you just spent the last 20 minutes trying to sell to them." The collective gasp from the front row was audible. My father half stood from his chair, his face draining of all color. The venture capital investors leaned forward, instantly captivated by the dramatic confrontation unfolding in their boardroom. Preston let out a very nervous, high-pitched laugh, attempting to deflect the accusation with his usual manipulation. He looked at the investor panel, spreading his arms wide. "I apologize for this interruption, gentlemen," my brother said, attempting to sound professional despite his shaking voice. "My sister works in basic finance, and she often gets confused about complex artificial intelligence development. She has a history of making dramatic claims because she struggles with severe jealousy issues. We can just ignore this and move forward with the technical audit." He was still trying to gaslight me. Even standing on the precipice of destruction, he instinctively fell back on the toxic family playbook. I thought he could paint me as an emotional woman and dismiss my ownership of the project. He assumed these highly intelligent venture capitalists would just take his word and hand over $500,000. He was so entrenched in lies he could not see the massive federal trap he had stepped into. I did not argue with his pathetic character assassination. Arguing with a desperate narcissist is a complete waste of valuable energy. I preferred letting hard data do all the talking. I turned my attention to my encrypted tablet resting on the podium. I opened my command terminal and prepared to execute the final sequence. I built this artificial intelligence model from scratch. I knew every line of code, every algorithm, and every security protocol buried within the software. "You are right about one thing, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet register. "We are going to move forward with the technical audit right now. I turned my attention to the glowing screen of my encrypted tablet. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard with practiced speed. I did not hesitate. I typed a single complex command line into the secure terminal and hit the execute key. The massive high-definition presentation screen behind us instantly went black. The fake title slide Preston had so proudly displayed vanished into the digital void. For one agonizingly long second, the boardroom was plunged into absolute darkness. Then the entire screen flashed a blinding, brilliant shade of crimson red. The sudden burst of light illuminated the shocked faces of the venture capital investors. Preston flinched physically, shielding his eyes from the harsh glare. The red warning screen held for exactly 3 seconds before resolving into a stark white document. A massive, undeniable copyright certificate now dominated the front of the room. It was legally binding and crystal clear. In bold black letters, the certificate displayed my full legal name and registered corporate liability company. Below that was a precise cryptographic hash and an indisputable timestamp of creation, dated exactly 8 months ago. A collective gasp rippled through the front row of the audience. My father William stared up at my name glowing on the 50-inch monitor. He blinked rapidly as if trying to clear a hallucination from his vision. My mother. Deborah gripped her leather chair so tightly, her knuckles turned a stark white. Her smug satisfaction was completely wiped away, replaced by a terrifying realization that she had lost total control. Jasmine, the sister-in-law who weaponized her social media against me, lowered her smartphone. Her live stream was still running, but the camera pointed aimlessly at the floor. She stared at the copyright certificate, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She knew exactly what a digital footprint meant. Her entire narrative about her brilliant husband was fracturing in real time. I did not stop there. The technical audit was only half finished. I tapped my tablet screen a second time. The massive display behind us smoothly split down the middle. On the left, my undeniable copyright certificate remained brightly illuminated. On the right, a black terminal window appeared. Lines of green code began scrolling rapidly down the screen. I tapped a final key, and the scrolling text slammed to a sudden halt. The system automatically highlighted a specific block of data in bright yellow. "This is a secure access log," I announced, my voice projecting clearly across the silent boardroom. Because I deal with sensitive financial architecture, my files contain embedded defensive protocols. When a project is removed from my secure network, a tracer is instantly activated. I pointed directly at the yellow highlighted text on the screen. Let us look at the compilation history for this supposedly groundbreaking financial model. The log showed a string of numbers indicating an external Internet Protocol address. Beside it was a device registration displaying the words, "Preston Home Desktop." The most devastating piece of evidence was the timestamp located right next to his name. I read the numbers aloud, letting them echo in the quiet room. 8:42 in the evening. I looked directly at my mother, who was now visibly trembling in her front row seat. 8:42 is a very interesting time. I continued, keeping my gaze locked onto her terrified eyes. That was the exact moment 3 weeks ago when my family hosted a lavish dinner at our local country club. That was the exact minute you tapped your crystal glass and tried to publicly humiliate me into paying massive tuition bills. You created a massive spectacle in the main dining hall. You demanded my money and drew public attention to your cruel little performance. I shifted my gaze back to my brother, who looked like he was about to pass out. "But it was just a distraction, was it not?" I asked. "While my parents were cornering me in the lobby demanding my financial submission, you slipped away. You walked into the private family lounge, unzipped my work briefcase, and plugged a flash drive into my laptop. You stole my entire livelihood while our parents kept me occupied." The venture capital investors sitting around the mahogany table were completely silent. They were looking at Preston with absolute, unadulterated disgust. These investors had zero tolerance for intellectual property theft. They realized they had almost been duped by a charismatic fraudster. One of the senior partners actually pushed his notepad away and crossed his arms, glaring at my father with open contempt. My family had brought their toxic circus into a corporate arena, and the consequences were closing in around them. Dr. Reed remained seated, but his posture was rigid, his sharp gray eyes watching the execution unfold exactly as we had planned. Preston tried to speak, but his voice was nothing more than a pathetic squeak. "Stella, please," he begged, taking a shaky step toward me. "It is a misunderstanding. I just borrowed the framework. I was going to give you credit later. I promise I was going to pay you back." I looked at my brother, feeling a profound sense of closure. He was a coward standing in a stolen suit begging for mercy after trying to destroy my life. I stepped away from the podium and looked him dead in the eye. "You did not just steal my work, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register that carried perfectly across the tense boardroom. "You triggered a security protocol that sent an automated theft report directly to my servers the second you opened this file on campus." The color completely drained from his face. He staggered backward, hitting the edge of the acrylic podium. He realized he was not just caught in a lie. He was caught in a digital snare he could never escape. The trap was sprung. There was absolutely nowhere left to run. He was completely finished, and he knew it right now. The sheer absolute panic that gripped my brother was a magnificent thing to witness. Preston stumbled backward away from the acrylic podium, as if the plastic structure had stumbled backward away from the acrylic podium, as if the plastic structure had suddenly caught fire. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. He was hyperventilating, his perfectly styled hair now sticking to his damp forehead. The smooth, charismatic facade of a seasoned tech entrepreneur melted away completely, leaving behind nothing but a terrified 30-year-old man who had finally run out of other people's money to hide behind. He looked frantically at the heavy glass doors of the boardroom, but his legs seemed glued to the polished hardwood floor. The reality of the digital snare I had laid for him was crushing the air right out of his lungs. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled, gasping sound emerged. The stunned silence in the room violently shattered when my father William leaped up from his front row seat. His face was a dangerous shade of crimson red, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff white collar. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me, but he directed his booming voice toward the center of the mahogany table. "Dr. Reed, you cannot possibly believe this absurd performance," my father bellowed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "This is nothing but a petty family dispute. My daughter is a known liar who is completely consumed by bitter professional jealousy. She clearly hacked into Preston's computer and planted those fake copyright files to sabotage his pitch today. You need to turn off that screen immediately and let my son finish his presentation." Dr. Reed did not even flinch at my father's aggressive outburst. He remained seated, perfectly calm, folding his hands together on the desk. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Reed replied, his voice dropping to a low, icy register. "The technical audit logs were independently verified by our own venture capital security team hours before this meeting began. Your daughter did not hack anything. Your son brought a stolen proprietary algorithm into my facility and attempted to secure $500,000 by passing it off as his own work. That is not a family dispute. That is a highly documented felony." Hearing the word felony, spoken aloud by a prominent Silicon Valley investor, sent my mother into an absolute tailspin. Deborah threw herself forward, practically launching out of her leather chair. She burst into loud theatrical tears, sobbing with dramatic, exaggerated gasps that were designed to draw all the sympathy in the room. She rushed toward the podium, grabbing Preston by the arm, as if trying to physically shield him from the consequences of his actions. "Stella, how could you do this to your own flesh and blood?" my mother shrieked, crying so hard her expensive makeup began to run down her cheeks. "You are ruining your brother's entire life over a stupid computer program. Stop this ridiculous charade right now and tell them it was just a misunderstanding. You have a corporate job. You do not need this money. Why are you so evil?" I stood perfectly still behind the podium, gripping the edges with relaxed hands. I looked down at my mother, crying her fake tears, and felt absolutely nothing but a cold, detached sense of satisfaction. I was the icy queen of this boardroom, and she was just a desperate woman watching her golden child burn. I did not raise my voice to match her screaming. I kept my tone dead level, forcing her to hear every single syllable. I am not ruining his life, Mom, I stated clearly. He ruined it himself the second he decided to steal my intellectual property. He chose to walk into this building and lie to a panel of wealthy investors. I am simply holding up a mirror so everyone can see exactly who he really is. While my parents were busy screaming and crying, Jasmine was having a completely different reaction. My sharp, status-obsessed sister-in-law had instantly realized the catastrophic legal nightmare her husband had just stepped into. I watched from the podium as her public relations survival instincts kicked into high overdrive. She did not rush forward to comfort Preston. She did not yell at me or defend her husband's honor. Instead, her hands moved with lightning speed. She snatched her smartphone off the floor, immediately ending her live stream broadcast to her thousands of followers. She furiously deleted the previous promotional videos from her social media feed, covering her digital tracks as fast as she possibly could. Jasmine knew that associating her personal brand with a federal fraudster would destroy her influencer career overnight. She backed away from the front row, distancing herself from the chaotic scene, her eyes darting toward the exit. My father was losing his mind. He slammed his fist down on the back of his chair, glaring at the venture capital investors who were watching the meltdown with undisguised contempt. "You wealthy elites think you can just destroy a young visionary," my father yelled desperately, trying to regain control of the room. "We will sue this entire fund for defamation. We have lawyers. We will drag your university through the mud for setting up this elaborate trap." The senior investor sitting next to Dr. Reed scoffed loudly, shaking his head in absolute disgust. "You are in no position to threaten anyone here, sir," the investor said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Your son just attempted to defraud us out of $500,000 using stolen technology. You should be calling a criminal defense attorney, not threatening a civil lawsuit. This meeting is entirely over." Preston finally found his voice. He ripped his arm away from my mother's grasp and stepped toward the panel. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "I can fix this. I can learn the code. I can build a new model for you. Just give me a chance." Dr. Reed looked at my brother like a repulsive stain on the floor. The desperation in Preston's voice was pathetic. He stood before elite venture capitalists, openly admitting he did not know how to code the software he had just pitched. He begged them to let him keep the money while he miraculously learned artificial intelligence architecture on the fly. It was a display of lifelong delusion. He believed apologizing would make the world bend to accommodate his incompetence, just like our parents always did. My father, William, was not willing to surrender. He ignored Preston's humiliating confession and turned his aggressive focus back to me. He marched toward the podium, his face twisted in a desperate mask of fury. "You are going to fix this right now, Stella," my father commanded, his voice shaking with rage. "You are going to tell Dr. Reed that you gave Preston permission to use this software. We are family. You do not do this to your own blood. Sign over the rights to this project today, and we will handle the finances privately. Stop being vindictive and fix your mistake." I stood my ground behind the podium. I did not shrink away from him. I looked at the man who enabled my brother's destructive behavior for 30 years, feeling nothing but cold clarity. "You do not understand what is happening here, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is not a petty sibling rivalry. This is not a family dispute you can sweep under the rug by bullying me into submission." I pointed directly at my brother, who was trembling near the screen. Preston did not just borrow a homework assignment. He committed a major financial crime. My mother let out a loud gasp from her seat. She clutched her necklace, looking around the room as if expecting someone to declare this a terrible prank. "Stella, stop using such horrible words," she cried out, her voice shrill. "He is a good boy. He just made a small mistake because he was eager to succeed." I turned my attention to my mother, ensuring my words would shatter her delusional reality. "It is not a small mistake, Mom," I stated firmly. "Yesterday afternoon, your golden boy signed a binding preliminary contract with this fund. He legally certified that the intellectual property he was submitting was his own original creation. Based on that fraudulent signature, he accepted a $10,000 stipend as an advance on his commercial grant. He initiated a financial transfer across state lines, using a stolen patent as his collateral. I paused, letting my words sink into the silent room. That crosses the threshold from academic dishonesty directly into federal wire fraud and grand larceny. The color drained from my father's face. He finally understood the gravity of the situation. He realized this was a legal nightmare his retirement accounts could not fix. He opened his mouth to argue, but the heavy glass doors at the back suddenly swung open. The sound was loud, cutting through the thick tension in the room. Everyone turned to look. Two campus security officers strode into the room, followed by two local police officers. The heavy clanking of their equipment belts echoed against the polished floor. The officers looked entirely professional, moving with purposeful determination toward the front of the room. Jasmine let out a sharp, terrified squeak and physically backed away from her husband, pressing herself against the glass wall. She wanted no part of what was about to happen. Dr. Reed stood up from the center of the mahogany table, adjusting his suit jacket. He looked at the approaching officers and gave a curt, professional nod. Then he turned his sharp gray eyes back to my brother. "Preston Miller," Dr. Reed announced, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. "This university and this fund maintain a strict zero-tolerance policy for financial fraud and academic theft. You have violated our core ethical standards and attempted to defraud our investors using stolen corporate property." Preston shook his head wildly, tears streaming freely down his cheeks. He held his hands up in a pleading gesture. "No, please, Dr. Reed, you cannot do this," he begged, his voice cracking. "My family will pay you back the $10,000. We will give it back right now. Just let me withdraw my application. I will leave quietly. Please do not call the police." Dr. Reed ignored his pathetic pleading. "Your admission to the Master of Business Administration program is hereby permanently revoked," Dr. Reed stated, delivering the final academic blow without hesitation. "Your scholarship is canceled, and the seed funding offer is completely withdrawn. You are no longer a student at this university. As for the financial crimes you committed yesterday, the authorities will take it from here." The two local police officers stepped past my father and approached the podium. One of the officers firmly grasped Preston by the arm, turning him around. Preston offered no physical resistance. He was completely broken. He just stood there, sobbing openly as the officer pulled his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed across the quiet boardroom. It was the sound of undeniable consequences catching up to a man who had spent his entire life running from them. My mother let out a devastated scream. She lunged forward, trying to reach her son, but my father grabbed her by the waist, holding her back. William looked like a man who had watched his entire world collapse into worthless ash. He stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, but did not say a word. He knew he had lost. I stood at the podium watching the police officers read my brother his rights. I felt a very deep, satisfying sense of justice. The federal hammer had dropped, and the beloved golden child was finally being dragged out into the harsh, unforgiving, cold light of reality, where no one could save him. The heavy steel of the handcuffs clicked loudly, echoing across the silent boardroom. Preston slumped forward, his knees giving out as the reality of his situation finally crushed his delusions. The local police officer hauled my brother to his feet, reading him his Miranda rights in a flat, clinical voice that offered absolutely no sympathy. My mother, Deborah, lunged forward again, letting out a guttural scream, but my father held her back, his grip bruising her arms. He knew that interfering with a federal arrest would only land them in the cell right next to their golden child. Preston looked at me, his eyes wide with raw terror. He mouthed the word "please," but no sound came out. I did not blink. I did not offer him a single ounce of comfort. I simply watched the consequences of his actions swallow him whole. William could not handle the destruction of his perfect family image. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame for the fire he had fueled for 30 years. He released his grip on my mother and marched toward the podium, his face twisted with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are completely dead to us," he screamed, his voice breaking under the weight of his fury. "You are a monster, Stella. You set him up. You plotted this entire thing just to ruin him because you are a miserable, lonely woman. Enjoy this little performance, because it is the last thing you will ever get from this family. I will personally call my lawyers this afternoon. I will make absolutely sure you do not see a single dime of your grandfather's estate. You are cut out of the will completely. You will get nothing. I let him finish his pathetic little tantrum. I looked at his red, sweating face and let out a short, cold laugh. My laughter caught him off guard, forcing him to stop yelling. You cannot cut me out of an estate you do not even own. Dad, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. What are you talking about? He demanded, taking a step back. I picked up my encrypted tablet from the podium. I am talking about your massive real estate debts, I explained. You took out a huge second mortgage on the estate last year to cover Preston's previous failed business ventures. You defaulted on those payments 3 months ago. The bank was preparing to foreclose on your entire portfolio. My father swallowed hard, the color rapidly draining from his face. He knew I was telling the truth, but he did not understand how I had the details. I smiled, stepping out from behind the podium. You do not own the estate anymore, Dad. I continued, my voice ringing through the quiet boardroom. The bank sold your distressed debt to a private equity firm last month, and guess who set up the anonymous corporate liability company that purchased every single one of your outstanding loans? I paused, letting the realization hit him like a freight train. I own the debt, Dad. I hold the deed to your house. I hold the deed to the estate. I hold the deed to your entire life. If you ever threaten me again, I will evict you and Mom before the sun goes down tomorrow. My father collapsed into a chair in the front row, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He had nothing left. He had leveraged his entire financial existence on a son who was currently wearing handcuffs, and he had just realized his discarded daughter held the keys to his literal survival. But the destruction of my toxic family was not completely finished yet. Jasmine, my ambitious public relations manager sister-in-law, had been standing quietly near the glass wall, observing the entire catastrophe. She had calculated the exact financial and social ruin that was about to rain down upon her husband. She knew that Preston was facing federal prison time and massive restitution debts that would bankrupt them both. Jasmine was a survivor who cared only about her personal brand. She was not about to go down with this sinking ship. Jasmine stepped forward, walking right past my sobbing mother. She looked at Preston, who was still being held by the police officers. Then she looked directly at the wealthy venture capital investors sitting around the mahogany table. I had absolutely no idea he was doing this, Jasmine announced, her voice suddenly trembling with a flawless performance of victimhood. I am completely shocked and horrified by his actions. I was manipulated by him too. He lied to me every single day. Preston stared at his wife in absolute disbelief. Jasmine, what are you doing? He choked out, fresh tears streaming down his face. You knew about the code. You helped me pick out the presentation boards. Jasmine ignored his pleas entirely. She reached down to her left hand. In one swift, dramatic motion, she pulled her expensive diamond wedding ring off her finger, the ring my parents had paid for. She tossed it onto the mahogany table, where it spun with a sharp metallic clatter before coming to a dead stop. I am filing for divorce this afternoon, Jasmine declared loudly, ensuring everyone in the room heard her clearly. I refuse to be associated with a criminal who steals from his own family. I am so deeply sorry for what he did to you, Stella. Jasmine did not wait for a response. She grabbed her designer handbag and marched straight out of the boardroom, leaving her husband to face the authorities completely alone. She threw Preston under the bus without a second thought, prioritizing her influencer reputation over her marriage vows. The ultimate irony was that my brother had finally met someone just as ruthless and selfish as he was. I watched the police officers escort my weeping brother out of the heavy glass doors. My mother trailed behind them, wailing his name, while my father remained slumped in his chair, utterly broken. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung shut behind my parents, sealing their fate and silencing my mother's dramatic wailing. I stood at the acrylic podium for a moment longer, just breathing in the quiet atmosphere of the room. The venture capital investors had already begun gathering their briefcases and tablets, shaking their heads at the absolute circus they had just witnessed. Dr. Reed offered me a brief, respectful nod before turning to speak with his partners. I packed my encrypted tablet back into my leather bag and walked out of the building. Stepping out into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. A burden I had carried for 32 years was finally gone. I walked toward my car and slid into the driver's seat. Almost immediately, my cell phone began to vibrate violently against the center console. I picked it up and watched the notifications flood my screen in a rapid, desperate wave. There were 14 missed calls from an unknown local number, which I assumed was Preston calling from a police precinct holding cell or a lawyer's office begging for a miraculous bailout. Then came the barrage of text messages from my mother. The preview bubbles on my screen read like a descent into total madness. "Stella, you need to fix this right now," she wrote. "How could you let them arrest your brother? Pick up the phone. We are losing the house. Pick up the phone right now. You owe this family." I read the frantic messages, feeling completely detached from her panic. She still thought she could command me. She still believed that if she screamed loud enough, I would simply surrender and sacrifice my own life to rebuild their shattered illusion. I opened my phone settings and navigated to my contacts list. I selected my mother, my father, my brother, and my former sister-in-law. In one smooth motion, I tapped the red button that read, "Block all." The constant vibrating instantly stopped. My phone was silent, and my life was finally my own. The fallout over the next few weeks was swift, brutal, and entirely public. Preston was officially arraigned on federal charges of wire fraud and grand larceny. Because he signed binding documents and accepted stipends using stolen property, the federal prosecutors showed him absolutely no mercy. His attorney tried to argue it was a misunderstanding, but my digital security logs were ironclad. Preston is awaiting sentencing and facing significant prison time along with massive financial restitution. His fake entrepreneur persona was permanently destroyed. My parents suffered an equally devastating collapse. Without my financial support and with massive legal fees for Preston's defense, they defaulted on their remaining obligations. I kept my promise. As the owner of the anonymous company holding their debt, I initiated immediate foreclosure. They were evicted from the sprawling estate they could never afford. The scandal of Preston's arrest and the public nature of their financial ruin utterly annihilated their social standing. They were quietly asked to resign from their exclusive country club. Their wealthy friends entirely abandoned them, wanting no association with convicted fraudsters. They were forced to move into a tiny rented apartment in a completely different city, stripped of the prestige they valued above their own daughter. As for Jasmine, her attempt to salvage her public relations career failed spectacularly. The internet is forever, and her followers quickly realized she had aggressively smeared an innocent woman to help her husband steal $500,000. Brands dropped her sponsorships, and her influencer channel collapsed under a wave of fierce public backlash. She had thrown her husband under the bus to save herself, but she ended up trapped under the tires right alongside him. A month later, I found myself sitting in a luxurious corner office on the top floor of the city's most prominent financial high-rise. The view of the skyline was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows, letting in the bright morning sun. I was wearing a sharp-tailored suit and sipping a perfectly crafted espresso. Sitting across from my massive oak desk was Dr. Alistair Reed. I was not there to interrogate me or discuss my brother. He was there for business. "Ms. Miller," Dr. Reed said, opening a sleek leather folder and sliding a thick stack of documents across my desk. My venture capital board was incredibly impressed by the artificial intelligence predictive models we saw during that unfortunate presentation. We were even more impressed by the ruthless strategic mind of the woman who actually coded it. "We believe your software is going to revolutionize modern wealth management." He tapped the top page of the contract. "We are officially offering you the $500,000 seed funding grant to develop your architecture legitimately. We want to partner with your firm to bring this technology to the global market." I looked down at the contract. It was the exact same grant my brother had tried to steal, but this time my name was typed boldly across the top line as the rightful founder and chief executive officer. I did not need to fake my competence or rely on stolen glory. I had earned this moment through years of relentless dedication and brilliant strategy. I picked up my favorite heavy metal pen and signed my name on the dotted line. I slid the contract back to Dr. Reed and smiled. It is a pleasure doing business with you, Dr. Reed, I said. I took another slow sip of my espresso and turned my chair to look out over the sprawling city skyline. I was completely free of my toxic family. I had protected my legacy, secured my fortune, and reclaimed my peace. Sometimes the best way to handle toxic family members is not to fix them. It is to let them build their own gallows. Has your family ever tried to take credit for your hard work? Let me know down in the comments. One of the most profound lessons we can learn from Blanche's journey is that our inherent worth is never defined by the people who fail to love us properly. When Blanche was abandoned at the airport by her mother at just 15 years old, it shattered everything she thought she knew about family. It is incredibly natural in such devastating moments to internalize that rejection and believe we are somehow unlovable or broken. However, as her story unfolds, we see that her mother's actions were a reflection of her own severe limitations and selfish desires, rather than a reflection of Blanche's actual value. By bravely reaching out for help, Blanche discovered that true love and support were waiting for her in the form of a father she thought had forgotten her. She learned the difficult but empowering truth that family is not solely about biological ties. It is defined by the people who consistently choose to show up, prioritize you, and protect your well-being. Blanche's ability to rebuild her life, establish firm boundaries with her toxic mother, and eventually find peace shows incredible resilience. She transformed her deep trauma into a source of strength, ultimately dedicating her career to helping other children navigate the painful realities of family separation. This narrative reminds us that while we cannot control the betrayals we might suffer from those closest to us, we possess the absolute power to write our own conclusions. You are the author of your future, and you have the strength to build a beautiful life, surrounded by people who truly value you. What unexpected sources of support have helped you